On behalf of SQUIRE Pation Bogs, I would like to welcome you to Trade Talks, A View from Washington. I'm John Alderton, the Office Managing Partner here at SQUIRE Pation Bogs in Leeds. I'm joined today by John Dickerman. John joined the CBI in 2012 and handles the day-to-day running of its Washington DC office. The office principally focuses on policy questions that involve US government relations, international trade, financial services, climate change, energy, telecoms and transport. Prior to joining the CBI, John worked as a legislative and policy advisor for two members of Congress. John and I will explore the socio-economic and political issues which are facing the UK's trading relationship with the US. So, without any further ado, let's talk trade. John, could you tell us what you think are the top 5 economic trends you're seeing in the US economy and how those are relevant to trade in the UK?
Yeah, I think maybe coming up with 5 is a bit challenging for me. I'm not an economist, but I can lay out a couple at least. I think first and foremost, you've got interest rates that are rising now for the first time in several years. That's really good for foreign investment in the US. It's good if you're a home builder. It's good if you're a car dealer. So all of those things are actually exciting, particularly for business. The second trend is probably the fact that there are more and more baby boomers. You know, people of my parents' generation, our parents' generations who aren't retiring because they haven't saved as much as they could have, or because government isn't providing the services that they need to provide in terms of retirement benefits for them. And that trend, of course, is challenging for business because it means that there's not enough turnover when it comes to high-skilled jobs, but also when it comes to services positions that younger generations can fill. Eventually, probably means a little bit more unemployment than we've seen in current years, which I think could be very challenging for the U.S. in the future, and particularly challenging for companies that are investing in the U.S. because they're heavily services related and reliant on people who have the skills that perhaps they've developed, but maybe don't want to pay kind of the certain rate that baby boomers are required these days. So I think those are a couple of challenging ones.
What's your forecast for how US and UK trade relationship will develop over 2018?
So this is a very challenging question for a couple of reasons. I think first off, because we have a new administration, we're still trying to feel our way through what their trade platform is going to be. We've got a pretty good idea that they're going to be focused more on protectionist issues, external to the United States, trying to get trade deficits down. I mean, certainly that's been a key for this administration when it comes to their trade policy. That as it specifically relates to the UK, the huge challenge that the US has going forward is figuring out what the UK's competency is as it relates to trade in the aftermath of Brexit. And that's not something that we can necessarily do, that the US can necessarily do, until the UK has really fleshed out its position with the EU. And I think that's a huge challenge for US business that wants to invest in the UK. And certainly it's a huge challenge for US government and how they approach trade with the UK. Now, the US and the UK are currently engaged in a high-level working group to discuss what the trade relationship should or could look like in the aftermath of Brexit. Right now, those are preliminary discussions. They're certainly exciting, certainly for British business that wants to invest in the US, of course. But there's only so much that they can do. And I think throughout 2018, we'll be able to explore that a little more, but also be able to explore what we can do outside of traditional trade deals. And that's really important for British business going forward if they want to invest in the US, because everything doesn't have to be done within the framework of a trade deal. Talking about mutual recognition of qualifications, for example, in the services field, loosening immigration rules for labor mobility issues. Those are areas that progress can be made on outside of the framework of a trade deal, which should be a focus for the discussions.
So, crystal ball time. Where do you see the US political landscape and the trade landscape in, say, 2027?
Well, right now, everything in Washington feels very chaotic. I feel very free to say that because I think it's something that's reported every day in the news. So it's difficult to see what the framework is going to look like in 2 years, let alone 10. But I think It's very fair to say that the U.S. has kind of increased a protectionist mode in the last 5 years. You see lots of Buy American clauses in effect in different states. Certainly this administration has an American first bent to it. So we would expect the protectionist trajectory, unless we lobby them effectively, to head in that direction more. It's certainly something that we don't want to see because there's so much benefit to foreign investment in the U.S. for American jobs, but also for British jobs as well. I think British investment creates 1 million jobs in the U.S. every year. U.S. investments creates 1 million jobs in the U.K. every year. So we need to make sure that those mutually beneficial investment relationships and trade relationships are actually talked about in a really positive way in order to open up the markets even more. But I mean, looking forward 10 years, I think right now you'd be afraid that the U.S. is heading in a protectionist way, but very hopeful that with the right lobbying, with the right investment, that could reverse course a bit.
What's the word on the street in DC, sort of 1 year on from President Trump coming into office? What's happening?
Yeah, I think still Washington, D.C. feels like a very partisan city. That's something that hasn't changed much from the last few years of the Obama administration. In fairness to President Trump, I think he's trying to get his feet under him. They're trying to figure out what direction this administration wants to go beyond 2 or 3 campaign promises that they've really focused on. And those campaign promises would be kind of health care reform, of course, immigration reform, and then tax reform, which they're talking about right now. Beyond that, there's a lot of work to be done within the administration to really develop the framework that they need to develop to move forward policies that are perhaps more important from a political perspective than each of those. There are hundreds of jobs still yet unfilled in Washington, D.C., which makes it very complicated to do business in the city. I think the administration would probably blame Democrats for obstructionism there. And there's some truth to that, of course. When you're the opposition party, you want to make sure that your voice is heard and heard loudly. But at the same time, I think the government, as it stands now, has been slow to fill some very important roles. We'd like to see that fixed as soon as possible because it's very important for us in our day-to-day roles to have people that we can go and talk to and get business done. And if there's nobody in post, can't happen.
So we talk about the special relationship between the UK and the US. What do you see that as?
Yeah, I like to refer to it as the essential relationship. Special relationship sometimes gets a little bit too much play and becomes a little too cliche. We all smile a little bit when we say it now, which probably is not fair to Winston Churchill. He actually, I think, delivered the speech where he called it a special relationship in my home state in Missouri. But it is essential in many ways. We've talked about the economic importance of the relationship, and it is hugely important. I mean, the US and the UK share the largest bilateral trading relationship in the world, to the tune of some, $1 trillion when you look at investment on both sides of the Atlantic. $500 billion worth of British investment into the US in every single state in the Union, 1 million jobs created. 18% of all the foreign direct investment in the United States is done by British business. And a huge amount, of course, of American investment happens in the UK as well. So I think it's the biggest, most important trading relationship among kind of countries bilaterally in the world. And I don't see that changing anytime soon. The US and the UK are mutually leaders in research and development, the best universities in the world, although some of my French and German colleagues would probably get mad at me for saying that. But hey, it's true. Look at the numbers. Very desirable places to do business. You all well know rule of law is very important in the US and the UK, and having those kind of mutually or these similar legal systems is very important to doing business as well. The financial connection between New York and London, the 2 leading financial centers in the world, incredibly important today and will be important in the future as well.
Okay, no, it's good to hear. What barriers would you say there are to growing a successful trading relationship in the US for a UK business?
I think the biggest barrier is really that this point about protectionism in the US. Specifically, we talk about the Buy American clauses and this American First regime that the Trump administration is promoting. That's problematic in areas that are very important for British investment in the US. That's particularly true in the area of public procurement, government contracting, less so in defense because defense is so specialized, though I know my defense colleagues would disagree with me on that because it is a very closed market in some ways as well. But there's a huge amount of opportunity in procurement for British business. I oftentimes describe it as the crown jewel of investment between the US and the UK. Just in infrastructure alone, this administration is talking about investing over $2 trillion in the next couple of years in improving American infrastructure when it comes to highway redevelopment, bridges, tunnel construction, airport reconstruction. These are all areas that British business has an expertise in that is unique in the world and uniquely would be important as an investment opportunity in the United States market. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges. Of course, there's labor mobility issues and tax reform issues that need to be addressed as well. And there's always concern about mutual recognition of financial services regulations, particularly in the aftermath of the financial crisis, that needs to be addressed. But that can really only be addressed at a regulatory level.
And what would you say that a UK business needs to be aware of in building a trade relationship in the US?
So I think the most important thing is to remember that while the US is one country, it's 50 different jurisdictions. A lot of times when people think about investing in the United States, they think because we have a mutual language, we have a very similar legal system, that it's an easy place to invest. And in some respects, that's true. I mean, we're not talking about investing in Brazil or China or India, which all present unique challenges. We're talking about investing in an English-speaking country. At the same time, if you invest in California, you're going to face much different challenges than you would if you were investing in a place like Texas, because each of these jurisdictions has their own tax code, they have their own labor models, and many other issues that need to be concerned with. So I think that is probably the biggest issue.
John, thank you very much. That's been really helpful and interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.